Well, let's develop that story a little bit further now as we cross to our reporter Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's been monitoring events at the special United Nations Security Council session on the situation in Burundi, which will be getting away at 10 o'clock South African time. Sherwin, thanks for joining us. What can we expect from this Security Council meeting a little bit later on?
Well, clearly renewed urgency, Peter, given what is now happening on the ground in Burundi. More than 200 people are now confirmed dead, according to UN figures, since this conflict, this low-level conflict really began to take root in April earlier this year. We have over 200,000 refugees from what you must remember is a very small country in East Africa. I mean, in relation to the size of Burundi's population, 200,000 is a significant number fleeing into neighboring countries. So not only a political crisis, but now an emerging humanitarian one. What we will do in the Security Council later here in New York, about 3 p.m. Eastern time, as you said, 10 p.m. your time, is to hear from the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, who will speak on behalf of the Secretary General, and he will really spell out the political dynamics that are playing out on the ground. The United Nations is essentially supporting the facilitation role led by President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. And so we will hear exactly what steps are being taken in terms of bringing the parties back to the negotiating table. In addition, we will hear from a representative of the African Union Commission, and also live from Geneva, the High Commissioner for Human Rights will brief really about the human rights situation on the ground. Zaid al-Rad Hussein has for a long time now detailed specific instances of violence and the targeting of civilians, human rights activists, and a number of opposition protesters who have been killed. So really a plethora of speakers here today that really will take a very close look at how things are emerging on the ground.
Rwanda's President Paul Kagame this week accused Burundi's President President Nkurunziza of, I suppose, standing by whilst people were being killed. Is there anything more substantial that we can expect from the Security Council in the short term? I mean, what can they do?
Unprecedented speech from Rwanda's president in so many ways, Peter. It's not very often that you hear an African head of state very directly take to task the actions of a fellow leader, and that is exactly what he did. And I think from Leana Tsotetse's report there, you hear that there is an escalation in the rhetoric on the ground, rhetoric that might remind you of what happened in Burundi over 20 years ago, concerns about mass atrocities, concerns that the rhetoric might take us back to an era of genocide. So very, very pointed remarks from Rwanda's president. And just to quote you, I mean, Liana referred to this. The president talked about stamping out the enemies and terrorists in his country, of course referring to Pierre Nkurunziza here. And Burundi's Senate president was talking about today the police will shoot in the legs, but when the day comes that we will tell them to go to work, in exclamation marks, don't come crying to us. So clearly a concern. But also what we must not forget, Peter, are the dynamics in the Security Council. We've seen from Western countries a push to have the Security Council take a firm hand regarding Burundi, but opposition from the likes of Russia, China and Venezuela that keep talking about this being a sovereign issue for Burundi and for Burundians to decide on the way forward, and not wanting the international community to get involved. So you see that familiar dynamic, that split in the road, again emerging on this conflict in Burundi.
One final question on the economic front. A further blow to Burundi with an announcement from President Barack Obama that the country's future inclusion in AGOA. What can you tell us about that?
Well, similar to the letter warnings about South Africa's possible exclusion in 60 days, there was also a letter sent to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate by President Obama, basically telling them that they will eject Burundi from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act come the 1st of January 2016. Now, this might not be seen as a huge economic blow to Burundi, which I might add is one of the poorest countries in the world. Their exports to the United States, Peter, total around $4.4 million, as opposed to Kenya, which is around $500 $256 million annually, and South Africa, which is over $1 billion annually. So not a huge economic blow, but more a political statement. The United States president clearly facing some obstacles at the United Nations Security Council, so doing what they can in terms of, punching them in the gut, if you will, in terms of the economic action. So they will be excluded, Peter, come the 1st of January 2016.
And that's where we'll leave it. Sherwin Bryce-Pease speaking to us from the US about the UN Security Council meeting that's going to be in session 10 o'clock South African time, discussing the tricky situation that Burundi finds itself at this time.